I'm going to read chapter 36 of my book, American Predators by Anthony Devellano, available on Amazon Books. Chapter 36, President Donald Stump. Donald Stump was giving a keynote speech to a white supremacist convention in Charlottesville to a packed house. The gathering had the look and feel of Stump's constant campaign rallies that had continued even after his second presidential win via the Electoral College. He worked from a teleprompter, but often went off script to attack minorities and his perceived enemies. His impression of a handicapped journalist was legendary and popular among his biggest fans. President Donald Stump had groupies. He hadn't touched his supermodel wife in years, but these days he could have any woman he wanted. At least, that's how he acted. Famous for bragging on a hot microphone to a TV journalist about being able to grab women by the pussy because he was a star, he now continued to do exactly that. It was so common that there was a White House employee whose job it was to throw taxpayer money in unrecorded cash to women who'd been assaulted. The assumption was that any attractive woman who got within grabbing range of Stump would get grabbed. This was Stump's idea of being devil may care. He mistook shock and revulsion for consent. He either really didn't understand the concept of consent or figured that the normal rules of human conduct don't apply to the President of the United States. Having trained his supporters to accept his lies without critical thought, he would refer to any woman who spoke out about being assaulted by him as an attention-grabbing liar. He was careful not to touch women who looked too young, even asking to see ID when he was unsure. For him, 18 was a hard limit. It was an important detail to him, as he was never wanted to be considered a pedophile. He looked down on pedophiles, even though he was happy to accept their political donations. He knew all about Bodie Godslaw's sick floating child rape factory. In principle, he objected to it, but Bodie was a very big campaign contributor, rivaling the Russian government for being one of Stump's biggest donors. Stump might have hated Godslaw's lifestyle, but he didn't hate Bodie's money, even if it had been earned on the dark web through child pornography. The Republican Congress had passed a new law in July of 2018 that allowed certain politically active organizations to not divulge their donors to the Internal Revenue Service. This opened up the field to dark money. This law was passed the day after the National Rifle Association had been proven to be accepting cash from the Russian government and giving it to Donald Stump to campaign for president. Rather than prosecute the crime, they legalized it. To a person with Donald Stump's ethics, if you aren't required to report who donates, it means you take anyone's money, even outright criminals. In fact, especially criminals. Stump glorified taking illegal money to further his dictatorial agenda. Since changing the law and the ensuing avalanche of dark money that flowed into Stump's war chest, he had successfully cut the Federal Bureau of Investigation's budget by 75%. The Republican Party had become 100% beholden to Stump and his Russian handlers. A senator in Texas couldn't sneeze without getting permission from Moscow first. The Russian KGB had set up shop in America. This was announced the day in 2019 when President Donald Stump announced that the Russian flag would adorn the White House next to the Stars and Stripes. He told his fawning crowds that it was smarter to be a partner with the world's second biggest nuclear power rather than adversaries. President Rupin of Russia was given a desk in the newly redesigned Oval Office. His desk was in front of the windows where the American president had sat for generations. Stump's was at the opposite end of the room, facing Rupin. This arrangement bothered Stump, but his commitment to Rupin was complete. They had agreed that Stump would use Rupin's desk when Rupin wasn't in America. Rupin was in Washington, D.C. regularly. The American National Office for the KGB was headquartered in the top 4 floors of the Hoover Building. After the massive budget cut passed by the Republican majority government in 2019 to the FBI hadn't been able to maintain its headquarters. Renting to the KGB had been declared a no-brainer and a big win for taxpayers by President Donald Stump. All across the country, anywhere the FBI had real estate, 60% of it became occupied by KGB personnel. They were tasked with investigating serious crimes. The FBI was demoted to investigating traffic tickets and shoplifters. They competed with municipal police forces for parking enforcement. They were kept 100% out of murder, mafia, and major thefts investigations. Ann Coulter had nearly gotten her wish. The FBI had been disbanded as a major federal investigative organization. They were a shadow of their former selves. The budget cut had meant that Special Counsel Robert Buehler, the man tasked with investigating President Donald Trump's connections to Russia, had been laid off. With only 25% of their budget remaining, all experienced investigators got laid off at the same time. They were replaced with a headcount cut by 50% that was paid minimum wage. Working for the FBI was now considered a dead-end job you did while you learned Russian. The KGB was always hiring, after all. On TV, the cop shows were about valiant KGB bringing dark-skinned people to justice, week after week. Racism had become outright policy from the White Horse. Stump rarely railed in coded language anymore about immigrants. He knew, his followers knew, and everyone else knew he didn't mind white immigrants, even if they were murderers and rapists. White was right to the right, this president and his Russian handlers. An open campaign of oppression had been declared on any and all races that weren't white. They were treated the way the gay and the LGBTQ community had been treated by Stump's administration originally. Basic rights were revoked, whites-only bathrooms and businesses reappeared across the country as if it was the 1930s all over again. For President Donald Stump's supporters, it was like Christmas every day in terms of getting their wish for white supremacy granted. People of color could be victimized without repercussion from their KGB, FBI, or any police organization. Rape, theft, and murder of POCs had skyrocketed, so the Republican government passed a law against recording and keeping statistics on these crimes. You could get in more trouble for reporting a crime against a dark-skinned person or LGBTQ person than you could for committing it, so long as you were white. The KGB had a policy of taking graft from those it investigated. Justice became explicitly about who could afford it. Only white-on-white crime was investigated, and in those cases only the rich prevailed. It was suggested that the FBI could be tasked with being bill collectors for the KGB, but even this was considered too important a task for the lowly Federal Bureau of Investigations. In the face of the upheaval Stump's policies were causing across America, the fate of the nearly 3,000 children stolen away from their immigrant parents got totally lost in the noise. Stump didn't like what Bodie and his friends wanted those children for, but he sure liked their money, so his administration had provided. If Stump could feel shame, he would, but he didn't. They said, "He'll never win again," and I proved them wrong. First we won in New Hampshire, then Rhode Island, then Florida. We were unstoppable, the NRA, white supremacists, and the Stump administration. It's almost like we could kill our enemies, hey? Like you guys have all the guns, we could just go out and shoot all the Democrats. Haha, wouldn't that be funny? Oh, okay, I'm joking. You shouldn't shoot people, okay? President Donald Stump winked at the crowd theatrically. But seriously, the rest of the world is in awe of how hard America is winning these days. Finally, they respect us as their natural superiors, as they should. After all, we got the bombs, right? Most people forget that. We have the greatest, mightiest military in the world. That's why I said we should have military parades every other month, so the world can see our power. You've seen these parades, so patriotic, very patriotic. So anyways, we're winning. By every measure, America is winning in every way that people can even think of. I was saying to my staff the other day, I need another win, and they were like, but you've won everything, ha 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 ha. So winning feels good, doesn't it feel good? Stump lifted his hands up above his head to accept the rapturous applause. It feels so good it makes you think, why should it end? Why can we have only 8 years of the good times? Why should it end? It shouldn't. It shouldn't. America deserves better than that. America deserves better. China has a president for life, very strong country. President for life. Russia has a president for life, very, very strong. These nations understand the need for consistency. Consistency. We need consistency. 3 years from now, if we let some Democrat take this office, we will be in trouble. Oh boy, will we be in trouble. Goodbye, whites-only restaurants. Hello, cross-dresser fellow following your kids into public bathrooms. The Democrats can't be allowed to win ever again. Too much is at stake. We've made too much progress in the last 5 years. Dark-skinned immigration has been ended. He shouted the last word for effect. Men no longer live in fear of being falsely accused of sexual assault, a made-up crime. The witch hunt is over. The other witch hunt is over too, right? We showed the FBI who is boss, right? Robert Bueller is in unemployment line right now, haha, isn't he? I said to him, you no longer have a job. It was beautiful. You should have seen there. It was beautiful. You no longer have a job, was Donald Stump's catchphrase he had made famous on his narcissistic reality TV show, Celebrity Suck Up, where C and D-list celebrities performed like circus animals until he fired them. So we are winning every day. It should be this way forever. So I've directed my staff in the Congress to draw up a new constitution that takes into consideration the kind of America that the people here today in Charlottesville want forever. We've been making do with the old Constitution for too long. Don't get me wrong, it was a good Constitution in its time. After the Canadians burned down the White House, it was a very dark time, so they did their best. President Stump's grasp of American history was legendarily shaky. But we can do better right now. We can do a better deal, right? We need to ensure that these good days don't end. We need a constitution that understands our values and understands we need to defend against anyone who isn't white. We need to keep our nation pure. That's what the Bible tells us. We can only be safe from Sharia law if we fix our constitution and install me as president for life. It's the only way. You know the Democrats will destroy the military and have our schools teaching your children to be gay. You know that will happen. It will happen unless we fix the Constitution. That's the key Constitution, our sacred document. Stump's face was solemn. I have my best people in Congress working on this new Constitution. It should be done soon. They tell me it should be law soon. The Democrats can complain, but we have the seats in both houses, don't we? You people outvoted them and over again, right? In every state that matters, everyone chose Stump. They know only I know how to run this country right. So you don't want the good times to end, do you? Donald Stump raised his hands in question. No, shouted the crowd in unison. And you want to keep winning, right? Every day winning, right? Yes, screamed the delighted audience. Those liberals don't even see us coming. Ha ha. This will make their heads explode. Ha ha. Stump grinned at the audience, who were laughing uproariously, thinking about how upset the stupid liberals would be at Stump's brilliant political maneuvering. Liberals, Democrats, climate scientists, and progressives of any type were regarded as race traitors and beneath contempt. President Donald Stump brought his speech to an end by leading a round of President for Life chants that followed him out of the building to his enormous armored limousine. I'm going to stop there. If any of this made you uncomfortable, it was meant to. This is very uncomfortable shit that President Trump is taking us into, and I don't like any of it. That's why I wrote this book ahead of time, to try to prevent him from getting elected a second time. And here we are, he's been elected a second time. So those of you that have persevered and listened all the way to the end of this video, I appreciate it. And find the book, American Predators by Anthony Devellano, on Amazon Books.